My grandmother left me everything, but my brother changed the will before I left. It's a story that sounds like it belongs in a movie, not in the life of a kid who just turned 18 and was walking out of a state-run group home with a worn-out duffel bag and exactly $37. But that was my reality. For 2 years, I'd been counting down the days until my release, dreaming of a freedom that felt abstract, like a word in a language I didn't speak. And when the day finally came, it wasn't a sunrise, but a gray, drizzling Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. The head counselor, a man named Mr. Henderson whose face was a permanent mask of weary disappointment, handed me a large manila envelope. "This came for you," he said, his voice flat. From a lawyer, he didn't wish me luck. He just turned and walked back inside, the heavy metal door sighing shut behind him, the lock clicking with a finality that should have felt liberating but instead just felt empty. I stood there on the cracked sidewalk, the city noise a sudden, overwhelming roar. For a moment, I considered just dropping the envelope in the nearest trash can and walking away, starting fresh with nothing. But curiosity, or maybe just the sheer lack of any other direction to go, made me open it. Inside was a bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of called Sparrow Creek, a single, old-fashioned brass key, and a letter. The letterhead was from some law firm, cold and impersonal. It stated that following the passing of my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, her estate had been settled. It mentioned that her primary assets and the family home in the city had been bequeathed to my older brother, Ethan. To me, it said, she had left a small rural property and its contents. The key was for that property. There was a check for $500 for transitional expenses. It felt like a slap, a consolation prize. Ethan, the golden boy who stayed, got the real inheritance. I, the screw-up who got sent away, got a shack in the middle of nowhere. The familiar ache of resentment, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. It was the story of my life. Ethan was the responsible one, the smart one. I was the one with the temper, the one who couldn't stay out of trouble. It was a fight at school, a stupid, pointless fight that had been the final straw. The courts called it a pattern. My grandmother, frail and exhausted, had been convinced by social workers and by Ethan that she couldn't handle me. So I was gone. And in the 2 years I was away, she had died. I hadn't even been allowed to go to the funeral. Now, this letter was her last word to me. And it said, clear as day, that Ethan had won. He always won. If you're watching this, maybe you know that feeling. The feeling of being handed a script for your life that you never asked to read, let alone perform. If you do, I hope you'll stick with me through this. My story is about tearing up that script. It's about finding out that what looks like an ending is sometimes a beginning in disguise. So please, subscribe and become part of this community, because we all have stories that need to be told. The bus ride was long, 14 hours that stretched into an eternity of rumbling asphalt and blurry landscapes. I watched the city bleed into suburbs, then into sprawling fields, and finally into the dense, dark woods of the north. With every mile, the anger in my chest slowly cooled, leaving behind a hollow sort of sadness. I tried to remember my grandmother, not the tired, worried woman from my last few visits, but the one from before, the one who smelled like cinnamon and soil, whose hands were always dusted with flour. She used to let me help her in the garden behind the city house, teaching me the names of herbs, telling me that every plant had a purpose, even the weeds. Everything has a place, Leo, she'd say, her voice soft but firm. You just have to be patient enough to find it. Where was my place? It certainly wasn't in that group home, a place designed to contain problems, not raise people. And it didn't feel like it was at the end of this bus ride, in a town I couldn't even find on the smudged map at the depot. I thought about Ethan. He was 5 years older, and for as long as I could remember, we'd been like two different species forced to share a cage. He was meticulous, quiet, and ambitious. I was loud, clumsy, and lived entirely in the moment. After I was sent away, his calls and letters had dwindled to nothing. The last time I'd spoken to him was a brief, awkward phone call a year ago. He'd told me Grandma was sick, that he was taking care of everything. He'd made it sound like a burden, but I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He was the man of the house now. I fell into a restless sleep, the window vibrating against my head. I dreamt of my grandmother's garden, but it was overgrown and choked with thorns. I was trying to find her, calling her name, but my voice made no sound. The bus hissed to a stop, jolting me awake. The driver grunted, "Sparrow Creek." I was the only one who got off. The depot was just a wooden bench under a flickering fluorescent light attached to the side of a closed-down gas station. The air was cold, clean, and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was almost midnight. The town was asleep, a handful of distant lights twinkling in a vast, profound darkness. There was no cab, no one to call. The lawyer's letter had included a hand-drawn map. The Vance place, it was labeled. It looked to be about a 2-mile walk. So I pulled up the collar of my thin jacket, hoisted my duffel bag onto my shoulder, and started walking. The silence was unnerving at first. In the city, it was never truly quiet. Here, the only sounds were my own footsteps on the gravel shoulder and the rustle of unseen things in the woods that lined the road. The sky was a dizzying blanket of stars, more than I'd ever seen in my life. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. I felt impossibly small. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A rusted mailbox half hidden by overgrown bushes, with the name Vance barely visible in faded, peeling paint. A long dirt driveway disappeared into the trees. I followed it, the brass key feeling heavy and cold in my palm. The driveway opened into a clearing, and there it was. The house was a dark silhouette against the star-dusted sky. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, with a sagging porch and dark, empty windows that looked like vacant eyes. A massive barn stood beside it, its shape even more hunched and weary than the house. The lawyer had called it a small property. The house itself might have been small, but the land around it felt huge. It was surrounded by acres of what looked like fallow fields and bordered by a dense forest. It didn't look like a consolation prize. It looked like a forgotten kingdom. It was intimidating. The air of neglect was heavy, a physical presence. The grass was knee-high, and the porch steps groaned in protest under my weight. The brass key slid into the lock, felt stiff and used. I had to jiggle it, putting my shoulder into the door before it finally scraped open with a sound like a deep groan. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and something else, something faintly floral like dried lavender. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers searching for a light switch. I found one, flipped it, and was met with a weak, hesitant flicker from a bare bulb overhead. The light illuminated a small entryway and a living room beyond. Everything was covered in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. It was a house frozen in time, a house waiting for someone. I dropped my bag on the floor. The sound echoed in the crushing silence. I was home, or at least I was at the place I'd been sent. And as I stood there, a strange feeling washed over me. Not happiness, not yet, but the first fragile flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. The feeling of possibility. Because for the first time in a long time, there were no locks on the doors, no one telling me when to wake up or go to sleep. There was just me, a key, and a house full of secrets, and I was about to start uncovering them. The first day was a blur of dust and discovery. I spent the morning pulling the sheets off the furniture, revealing solid, dark wood pieces that were simple and sturdy. A deep, comfortable-looking armchair, a heavy dining table with 4 chairs, a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks. It was all old, but it was good. It had been cared for. The dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slanting through the grimy windows, a silent, swirling ballet. The silence of the house was a living thing. It pressed in on me, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every breath I took. I wasn't used to it. In the group home, there was always noise. A TV blaring, people shouting, the constant hum of institutional life. Here, the quiet felt like a challenge. It dared me to fill it. I found the kitchen at the back of the house. It was a time capsule from another era. A big porcelain sink, a clunky-looking stove, and an old refrigerator that hummed to life with a shudder when I plugged it in. The cupboards were mostly empty, save for a few tins of coffee, some sugar, and a set of simple, mismatched plates. But in a drawer, I found what I was looking for: cleaning supplies. My grandmother, I remembered, believed that any problem could be made smaller by cleaning. "You clear the space around you, you clear your head," she'd say. So I started cleaning. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and wiped down every surface until my arms ached. With each swipe of the rag, I felt like I was wiping away not just the dust of years, but the grime of my own past. I was claiming the space, making it mine. As the afternoon sun warmed the house, I started to feel less like an intruder and more like a resident. This place had a soul. I could feel it in the worn patches on the wooden floor where people had walked for generations, in the faint scratches on the window panes where someone might have watched the seasons change. By late afternoon, I was exhausted, but the house was breathing again. I made a list of what I needed: food, bedding, basic supplies. The $500 from the lawyer felt like a fortune. I decided to walk back into town. The 2 miles felt shorter in the daylight. Sparrow Creek was small, just a single main street with a grocery store, a hardware store, a diner, and a few other small shops. People nodded as I passed, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. They were sizing me up, the new arrival. At the grocery store, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Sarah rang up my supplies. "You must be staying at the old Vance place," she said, her voice warm. "Haven't seen anyone up there in years." "It's good to see a light on." Her simple words sent a strange warmth through me. A light on. I was the light. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. I bought groceries, a cheap set of sheets, and a new padlock for the barn, just in case. The walk back, laden with bags, was harder, but I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known before. That night, I made myself a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast. I ate at the big wooden table, the house quiet around me. The loneliness I'd expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was a sense of peace. After dinner, I started my real exploration. I went through the house room by room. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly my grandmother's. It had a simple iron bed frame and a large, carved wooden chest at its foot. The room smelled strongly of her, that lavender scent I'd noticed when I first arrived. The other bedroom was smaller, plainer. It felt like a guest room, or perhaps a child's room from long ago. There was nothing in there that gave me any clues. It was the chest in my grandmother's room that drew me. It was locked, a heavy, ornate iron lock. The brass key from the lawyer didn't fit. I tried everything, wiggling the key, searching the room for another one. Nothing. Frustration began to bubble up. This felt like a test. Another locked door in a life full of them. I left it for the night, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But my mind wouldn't let it go. I lay in bed, the new sheets feeling crisp and strange, and stared at the ceiling. Why lock the chest? What was inside that she wanted to protect? My thoughts drifted back to Ethan. I imagined him in the big city house, surrounded by my grandmother's valuable things, probably already selling them off. He had the real inheritance, the money, the assets. I had a dusty house and a locked box. The unfairness of it all started to creep back in. I had to force myself to push it away. I couldn't afford to get lost in that anger again. It had cost me 2 years of my life. It wouldn't cost me another minute. The next morning, I woke with a renewed determination. I wouldn't be beaten by a lock. I remembered something my grandmother used to do. She was an avid reader, and she always said the best secrets were hidden in plain sight, often in books. I went to the bookshelf in the living room. It was filled with old novels, poetry, and books on gardening. I started pulling them out one by one, shaking them, flipping through the pages. I felt foolish, like a kid in a detective story, but I kept going. And then I found it. It was in a thick, leather-bound copy of The Secret Garden, a book she had read to me dozens of times when I was little. Tucked inside the back cover was a small, flat envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. Inside the envelope was not a key, but a small, folded piece of paper. It was a letter written in my grandmother's elegant, looping script. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you have found your way home. I am so sorry I could not be there to welcome you. There is so much I need to tell you, so much I should have said long ago. Know this, my boy, you were never a burden. You were a joy. Sending you away was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have regretted it every single day since. I had to stop reading, my eyes blurring with tears. I sank into the armchair, the letter trembling in my hands. All those years I had carried the weight of being the problem, the kid who was too much to handle. And in one sentence she had lifted it. I took a deep breath and continued reading. I know what you must have been told about my will. I know it must seem like I chose Ethan over you. But things are not as they seem. Ethan has changed. The city and the allure of money have not been kind to his soul. I couldn't trust him. That is why I had to do things this way. The chest in my room, Leo. The combination is your birthday. The day you came into my life and made it brighter. All 4 numbers. Month and day. I stared at the letter, my mind racing. My birthday. 0-8-1-5. August 15th. It was so simple, so obvious. I rushed upstairs, my heart pounding. I knelt before the heavy wooden chest. My fingers, clumsy with anticipation, turned the small dials on the combination lock. Click, 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 click. I pulled the latch and with a soft thud, it came open. I lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old paper wafted out. The chest was full, and on the very top lay a thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a blue ribbon. Each one was addressed to me. The chest was a treasure trove of the past. Beneath the stack of letters were photo albums, a box of my old childhood drawings that I thought had been thrown away years ago, and even my father's old leather jacket, which I'd always loved. My grandmother had saved everything. She had held on to the pieces of my life even when I couldn't. It was overwhelming. I sat on the floor for a long time, just looking at it all, feeling the weight of her love, a love I had thought I'd lost. I untied the blue ribbon from the letters. There were at least 20 of them, each one numbered in the top right corner. The first one was dated just a week after I was sent away. I opened it and began to read. Her voice, so clear in my memory, seemed to speak the words from the page. She wrote about her loneliness, her guilt. She explained that the decision to let me go wasn't just about the fight at school. Ethan had gotten himself into serious trouble, into debt with dangerous people. She didn't go into details, but she said she had to sell some assets and use her savings to protect him. She was afraid those people might come after me, too. Sending me into the system, as horrible as it was the only way she could guarantee my physical safety. They couldn't touch you there, Leo, she wrote. It was a terrible choice between your freedom and your life, and I pray every night that I made the right one. I was trying to protect you both, but I fear I have failed you. The words hit me like a physical blow. All this time I had seen my placement as a punishment, a rejection, but it had been an act of protection. A desperate, flawed, heartbreaking act of a grandmother trying to save her family. The story I had told myself for 2 years began to unravel. I wasn't the cause of the family's collapse. I was a victim of it, just as she was. The anger I held for her dissolved into a profound, aching grief. I cried then, for the first time since I'd arrived. I cried for her, for the impossible choices she had to make. I cried for the lost years. And I cried for the boy who had felt so utterly alone and unloved. After a while, I picked up the next letter. It was a chronicle of her life without me. She wrote about the seasons changing on the farm, about her failing health, about Ethan's growing distance and his obsession with money. She described how he would talk about the value of the city house, the investments, how he pressured her to give him power of attorney. He sees assets, she wrote, not memories. He sees $signs where I see a home in the 5th letter. She laid out her plan. She knew she was dying. She knew Ethan would try to take everything. So she had created 2 wills. The one the lawyer had on file, the one that gave Ethan the lion's share, was a decoy. She wrote that she'd been forced to sign it under duress, with Ethan hovering over her, but she had intentionally made it legally flimsy. The real will, she explained, was hidden somewhere safe. "This farm, Leo," she wrote, "is not a punishment. It is your inheritance. It is your sanctuary. It may not look like much now, but the land is more valuable than you know. Not just for its soil, but for its peace. It is a place where you can build a life, away from the noise and the greed that has poisoned your brother. This is your home. If you choose it." The letter ended with a clue. The foundation of this family was built on hard work and honesty. It was built in the barn. Look to the post that bears the weight of the hayloft, the one marked with your grandfather's initials. I put the letter down, my mind reeling. A second will. The whole story was a lie. Ethan hadn't inherited everything. He had manipulated a dying woman, and now he was trying to manipulate me. The shock gave way to a cold, clear anger. This was different from the hot, directionless rage of my youth. This was a focused, righteous fury. I had to find that will. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and headed out to the barn. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the yard. The barn was even bigger up close, a hulking giant of weathered wood. The new padlock I'd bought felt flimsy against its massive, sliding door. I opened it and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of hay, dust, and time. Huge wooden beams crisscrossed high above me, lost in the gloom. Pigeons cooed and fluttered in the rafters. It was a cathedral of agriculture, silent and imposing. I found the main support posts for the hayloft. They were massive, thick beams of ancient timber. I ran my flashlight over them, searching for my grandfather's initials. On the third post, near the base, I found them, TV carved deep into the wood. I knelt down, my heart pounding. The letter said to look to the foundation. I examined the floor around the base of the post. It was packed earth, hard as concrete. But as I ran my fingers over it, I felt a slight give in one spot. I scraped away the dirt. Underneath was the edge of a wooden board. I dug with my fingers, then ran back to the house for a crowbar. It took all my strength, but finally, the board came loose with a groan of protest. And there, nestled in the dark, cool earth, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can painted black. It was heavy. I carried it back to the house, my hands shaking, and set it on the kitchen table. The latches were stiff, but I managed to pry them open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp, were two items. The first was a thick, legal-sized envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in my grandmother's hand, were the words, "My last will and testament." The second was a worn, leather-bound journal. I opened the journal first. The first page was a letter to me. "Leo, if you are reading this, you have found the truth. This journal contains my thoughts from the last year of my life. It documents everything Ethan has done. The pressure, the threats, the financial manipulations. It is my testimony. I am so sorry to burden you with this fight, but I could not let him erase you. I could not let him win. This is not about money, my dear boy. It's about justice. It's about home." I slowly turned the pages. It was all there in excruciating detail. Dates, times, conversations. How Ethan brought his own lawyer to her bedside. How he'd threatened to sell the farm to developers if she didn't sign the new will. How he'd isolated her from her old friends. It was a meticulous record of elder abuse, of greed consuming a person. The woman who wrote these pages was not frail and confused. She was sharp, angry, and fighting the only way she knew how. She was leaving me a weapon. Have you ever felt like you were seeing someone for the first time, even though you've known them your whole life? Reading that journal, I was finally meeting my grandmother. Not just as the soft, comforting figure of my childhood, but as a fierce, intelligent woman who had been backed into a corner and had come out swinging, planning for a future she wouldn't get to see. She wasn't just leaving me a farm. She was leaving me a mission. And as I sat there in the quiet kitchen, the weight of that mission settled on my shoulders. It was terrifying, but for the first time I didn't feel like running. If you've ever had to face a fight that felt too big for you, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the strength we need is already inside us, just waiting for the right reason to show up. If this story is resonating with you, take a moment to hit that like button. It lets me know that these stories matter, that we're in this together. Now let's get back to the barn, because there was one more secret waiting for me there. After reading the journal, I sat in stunned silence for what felt like an hour. The sheer scale of Ethan's deception was hard to process. He hadn't just been greedy, he had been cruel. He had systematically dismantled our grandmother's peace of mind for his own gain. The brother I knew, or thought I knew, was a stranger. The quiet, ambitious boy had become a monster. I carefully placed the journal and the sealed will back into the metal box. I needed to think, to clear my head. I walked out of the house and back toward the barn, the last rays of sunlight painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was getting cooler, and the scent of the pines was sharp and clean. I wandered around the side of the barn, my feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just moving, trying to walk off the nervous energy thrumming through my veins. And that's when I saw it. Tucked away behind a stack of rotting firewood was a small, low door, almost completely hidden by overgrown ivy. It was a cellar door, set at an angle against the barn's foundation. Curiosity piqued. I pulled away the vines. The wooden doors were warped and damp, but not locked. I heaved them open, revealing a set of steep stone steps leading down into darkness. A musty, earthy smell rose up to meet me. I hesitated for only a moment before grabbing my flashlight and heading down. The steps were slick with moss. At the bottom, a small, stone-walled cellar opened up. It was cool and dry. In the center of the room, there was a large, flat-topped rock that looked like it might have been used as a work surface. But what caught my eye was a section of the dirt floor in the far corner. It was smoother than the rest, as if it had been disturbed more recently. My grandmother's letters had taught me to be observant, to look for the things that were out of place. I knelt down and started to dig with my hands. The soil was loose, just a few inches down. My fingers hit something hard and metallic. I dug faster, my breath catching in my throat. It was another box, smaller this time, a simple metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, and my flashlight beam fell on stacks of $100 bills, neatly bundled with rubber bands. I gasped. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I started pulling out the bundles, counting them. 10,000, 20,000, 50. There was over $100,000 in cash. Tucked at the bottom of the box was one last letter. This one was short. Leo, this is for you. Call it a head start. It's clean money, from the sale of my mother's jewelry years ago. Money I kept hidden from the banks and from Ethan. Use it to pay the property taxes. Use it to hire a good lawyer. Use it to buy seeds for the spring. But most importantly, use it to live. Don't let this fight consume you. This money buys you freedom. The freedom to choose. Your grandfather and I built this farm with our bare hands. We survived droughts and floods and bad harvests. That resilience is in your blood, too. Now go and build your life. I sat there in the dark, cool cellar. The cash piled around me, and I felt the full, crushing weight of her love and her foresight. She hadn't just left me a problem. She had left me the tools to solve it. She had armed me with the truth in the journal, the law in the will, and the means in this box. She had given me everything I needed to win. I carried the box back to the house, my legs unsteady. I felt like I was in a dream. I hid the money, the will, and the journal back in the chest in her bedroom and locked it. I needed a plan. The next morning, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled up my driveway. My stomach clenched. A man in an expensive suit got out, looking around at the overgrown yard with a look of distaste. He walked up to the porch where I was sitting. "Leo Vance?" he asked. I nodded, not getting up. "I'm from Sterling Development," he said, handing me a business card. "We've been in negotiations with your brother, Ethan, to purchase this land. He informed us you were the resident. We're prepared to make a very generous final offer. Enough to set you up nicely somewhere else." He named a number that made my head spin. It was a life-changing amount of money. Far more than what was in the lockbox. I could take that money and disappear. Start over anywhere in the world. Free from Ethan. Free from this fight. For a fleeting second, I was tempted. It was the easy way out. No lawyers, no courts, no family drama. Just clean, simple cash. The man saw the hesitation in my eyes and smiled. A predatory, confident smile. Your brother is eager to close the deal, he said smoothly. He just needs your signature on a few documents to clear the title. He said you'd be cooperative, and that was it. The way he said it, the casual dismissal, the assumption that I was just a pawn in Ethan's game, a problem to be paid off. The anger returned, cold and hard. I thought of my grandmother, writing in her journal, fighting to give me this choice. I thought of her words. This is not about money. It's about justice. It's about home. I stood up, looking the man in the eye. The land's not for sale, I said. His smile faltered. I think you misunderstand the offer. I understand it perfectly. I cut him off. And I'm not interested. This is my property. And you can tell my brother to expect a call from my lawyer. The man's face hardened. The friendly facade dropped, revealing a cold, corporate ruthlessness. He stared at me for a long moment, then shrugged. Your mistake, he said. And without another word, he turned, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the car disappeared, a terrifying thought hit me. I didn't have a lawyer. The phone rang an hour later. It was an old rotary phone on a table in the hall, and the shrill, metallic ring made me jump. I picked it up cautiously. Hello? Leo? It's Ethan. His voice was tight, strained. What the hell did you do? I just got a call from Sterling. You tanked the deal. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost us? Cost us? I said, my own voice dangerously quiet. There is no us, Ethan. Not anymore. Listen to me, you little brat. He spat, his voice losing its composure. You are living on my property. I let you stay there out of the goodness of my heart. You will sign those papers, or I will have you evicted by the end of the week. You have nothing. You are nothing. The words that would have crushed me a week ago now felt hollow. He was bluffing. He was scared. He had no idea what I'd found. I don't think so, I said calmly. I think you're the one who's in trouble. I found what she hid, Ethan. All of it. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the panic rising. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. But the lie was thin and brittle. Yes, you do, I said. You know about the journal. And you know about the real will. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I said, I'll see you in court. And I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. My whole body was trembling. I had just declared war on my own brother. I walked out onto the porch and took a deep breath of the clean country air. The fear was real, but underneath it, something else was growing. A sense of my own power. My grandmother had given me a home, a mission, and the means to fight. Now I just had to find the right person to help me wage the battle. In her last letter, the one with the cash, she had mentioned one more thing. If you need legal help, go see Arthur Pendleton in town. He was your grandfather's best friend. He is an honest man. You can trust him. My next stop was clear. I was going to see Mr. Pendleton. Arthur Pendleton's law office was on the second floor of an old brick building on Main Street, right above the hardware store. The sign on the door was hand-painted, the gold leaf peeling at the edges. The whole place felt like it belonged to a different century. I walked in and a small bell chimed. An elderly woman with a mountain of white hair looked up from her typewriter. Can I help you, dear? She asked. I'm here to see Mr. Pendleton, I said, my voice sounding younger than I wanted it to. My name is Leo Vance. Her eyes widened slightly at the name. Eleanor's grandson, she said, more to herself than to me. He's expecting you. I was confused. He is. He's been expecting you for 2 years, she said with a gentle smile. Go on in. His door is open. The office was lined with books from floor to ceiling. A large oak desk sat in front of a window overlooking the town square. and behind the desk sat a man who looked as old and sturdy as the furniture. Arthur Pendleton had a kind, deeply wrinkled face and sharp, intelligent blue eyes. He motioned for me to sit down. "Leo," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'm glad you finally made it. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. One of my dearest friends. She said you were my grandfather's friend." I said, feeling a little more at ease. "That we were," he said with a sad smile. "Thomas Vance was the best man I ever knew. And Eleanor, she was the strongest. She came to see me about a year ago, told me the whole story. About you, about Ethan, about her plan." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine. "She told me you'd be coming. She said you'd have a metal box with you." I was stunned. She had planned for this too. She had set all the pieces on the board long before the game had even started. I reached into my bag and pulled out the ammunition can. I placed it on his desk. "It's all in here," I said. "The will, her journal, everything." He nodded slowly, as if he knew exactly what was inside. He spent the next hour reading. He read the will first, his expression unreadable. Then he read the journal, and I watched as his face darkened with anger and sadness. He would occasionally stop, take off his glasses, and rub his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh. When he was finished, he closed the journal and looked at me. "It's worse than she told me," he said quietly. "The level of coercion, the emotional abuse. This is a powerful document, son. This journal is her testimony from beyond the grave. It gives context and intent to the true will." He explained the legal situation to me in simple terms. The will Ethan had filed was likely invalid due to undue influence and the fact that a more recent, properly executed will existed. The journal provided the evidence to prove it. "We can fight this, Leo," he said, "and we can win. But Ethan won't go down quietly. He'll drag your name through the mud. He'll paint you as a delinquent, an opportunist. He'll use your past against you. It will be ugly, I know," I said, "but I have to do it. For her good," he said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. That's what she was counting on. He then laid out the choices, just as I had imagined them. We could go to court, a long, expensive, and public battle. Or we could use the evidence as leverage. "We send your brother a letter," Arthur explained. "We lay out our case. We attach a copy of the journal and the will. We let him know that if he fights, this journal becomes public record. The story of what he did to his dying grandmother will be available to anyone. The development company he's in bed with will run for the hills. His reputation will be destroyed. We offer him a choice. Walk away with nothing and this stays private, or fight and lose everything, including his name." It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy. It used Ethan's own obsession with appearances against him. "What do you want to do?" Arthur asked. I thought about the money from the developer. I thought about how easy it would be to just take a settlement and leave. But that would mean letting Ethan get away with it. It would mean letting his version of the story stand. My grandmother had fought to give me the truth. The least I could do was honor it. "I want to do what you suggested," I said, my voice firm. "We give him the choice. We let him hang himself." Arthur nodded, a grim smile on his face. "All right, son. Let's write a letter." The next few days were the longest of my life. Arthur drafted the letter and sent it via courier to Ethan's lawyer. Then we waited. I tried to keep busy working around the farm. I cleared weeds, patched a hole in the porch roof, and started cleaning out the barn. The physical labor helped to quiet the anxiety that was constantly buzzing just beneath my surface. I was swinging an axe, splitting firewood, when I heard the phone ring. I ran inside, my heart pounding. It was Arthur. "He folded," Arthur said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "His lawyer called me an hour ago. He's not going to contest the will. He's renouncing all claims to the estate. He just wants the journal to stay private." I sank into a chair, relief washing over me so intensely it made me dizzy. It was over, just like that. No fight, no court battle. He had seen the truth in black and white and known he was beaten. "He's a coward," I whispered. He's a pragmatist, Arthur corrected gently. He chose the path that did the least damage to himself. In the end, it was always about him. The legal formalities took a few more weeks. Papers were signed, the old will was thrown out, and the true will was probated. Suddenly, I was the sole heir to the Eleanor Vance estate. It included the farm, the city house, and a modest portfolio of investments that Ethan hadn't been able to touch. I was, on paper, wealthy, but standing in the kitchen of the old farmhouse, none of that felt real. The victory felt hollow. I hadn't won anything. I had just reclaimed what was mine. I hadn't defeated a villain. I had just exposed the sad, empty greed of my brother. I never spoke to Ethan again. He disappeared from my life as completely as if he'd never existed. Sometime later, I heard through Arthur that he had moved out of the country. I felt a pang of sadness for the brother I once had, the boy I used to build forts with in the living room, but that boy was long gone. Now, a new chapter of my life was beginning. I was 18 years old, standing on 100 acres of land that was all mine. I had a future that was a complete blank slate. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but now they were mixed with a powerful sense of hope. I looked out the window at the fields, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. My grandmother had given me more than a farm. She had given me a second chance. A chance to build something, to put down roots, to find my place. The work was just beginning. The house needed repairs, the fields needed to be tilled, and I needed to figure out who I was going to be in this new life. I walked out to the barn, the place where the truth had been waiting for me. I looked at the initials carved into the post, T.V. Thomas Vance. My grandfather. I ran my hand over the rough wood. I felt a connection to him, to my grandmother, to the generations of people who had worked this land. This wasn't just property. It was a legacy, and now it was my turn to be a part of it. I decided to sell the city house. It held no good memories for me anymore. I used the money to invest in the farm. I bought a new tractor, repaired the barn roof, and started studying sustainable agriculture at the local community college. The work was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done. But every evening, when I sat on the porch, tired and sore, and watched the sun set over my fields, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. I was building something real. The first year was a lesson in humility. I learned that nature doesn't care about legal documents or inheritance. It follows its own rules, its own rhythms. My first attempt at a vegetable garden was a disaster, eaten by deer and ravaged by blight. I learned that fixing a leaky roof is a lot harder than it looks. There were days I felt completely overwhelmed, lost in the sheer scale of the work ahead of me. I was lonely, too. The quiet that had once felt peaceful now sometimes felt oppressive. But I wasn't entirely alone. The people of Sparrow Creek, slowly but surely, started to accept me. Sarah from the grocery store would always save me the freshest produce. Old Mr. Henderson from the hardware store, no relation to the counselor from my past, taught me how to properly use a chainsaw and would give me advice on everything from plumbing to planting. He never asked about my past. He just seemed to accept that I was here now, trying to make a go of it. I started selling some of my produce at the local farmer's market. At first, I only had a few scraggly-looking carrots and some misshapen tomatoes to offer. But people bought them. They offered words of encouragement, shared tips, and treated me like one of their own. I began to feel the tentative threads of community weaving around me, a safety net I never knew I needed. One day, Arthur Pendleton stopped by. He found me in the barn, trying to repair a broken stall door. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me struggle with a warped board for a few minutes. "Your grandfather was never very good at carpentry either," he finally said with a chuckle. "He used to say he could build a life, but he couldn't build a straight shelf." We sat on a couple of hay bales, looking out the big barn doors at the fields. "Eleanor would be proud of you, you know," he said quietly. "She didn't just want you to have this place. She wanted this place to have you. She knew it would heal you. It's healing, isn't it? The work, the land, it is," I admitted. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And the best. That's how you know it's worthwhile," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. As he was leaving, he handed me an envelope. "This was in your grandmother's safe deposit box," he said. "I forgot about it until today." Inside was a photo I'd never seen before. It was of my grandmother and grandfather standing in front of the farmhouse. They were young, vibrant, and smiling, their arms around each other. The house behind them was freshly painted. The fields were neat and planted. On the back, my grandmother had written, "The beginning." I taped the photo to the dashboard of my old pickup truck. It became my touchstone. On the days when I felt like giving up, when a piece of equipment broke or a storm ruined a crop, I would look at that photo. I would look at their faces, full of hope and determination, and I would remember that they had started with nothing but this land and each other. I had started with so much more. I had their legacy, their home, and the truth they had fought to preserve for me. Slowly, things started to change. The farm began to thrive. I found my rhythm. I learned the seasons, the soil, the subtle language of the land. The house started to feel less like her house and more like my house. I painted the walls, fixed the floors, and filled the bookshelves with my own books. But I kept her armchair, the one where I'd sat and read her first letter. It was my reminder of where I had come from. One autumn afternoon, I was cleaning out the last of the clutter from the attic. In a dusty corner, under a pile of old blankets, I found a small wooden box. It wasn't locked. Inside were my mother's things. A few photographs, a diary from when she was a teenager, a pressed flower from her wedding day. My grandmother had saved her, too. I had very few memories of my mother, who had died when I was very young. Sitting in the dusty attic, going through her things, I felt a connection to her. Another missing piece of my story clicking into place. My family was full of ghosts, but for the first time, they didn't feel like haunting presences. They felt like a quiet, steadying force at my back. I wasn't just Leo, the kid from the group home. I was Leo Vance, son of a dreamer, grandson of fighters. I was a part of a story that was much bigger than my own pain. The farm wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was my anchor. It had taught me patience, resilience, and the quiet dignity of hard work. It had given me a place to belong. The inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't the money or the property. That was just the container. The real inheritance was the choice she gave me. The choice to face the truth, to fight for what was right, and to build a life of my own making. She gave me back my own story. It's a story I'm still writing, every single day. Every seed I plant, every fence I mend, is another sentence on the page. It's not a fairy tale. The scars of my past are still there. There are nights I still wake up with the ghost of a lock clicking shut in my ears. There's a sadness that lingers for the family I lost. But the past doesn't define me anymore. It's just part of the soil that I'm growing from. My grandmother taught me that everything has a place. Took me a long time, but I finally found mine. It's here, on this quiet piece of land, under this wide open sky. It's home. And so, I want to ask you a question. What does home mean to you? Is it a place, a person, a feeling? For so long, I thought I didn't have one. But this journey taught me that home isn't something you're given. It's something you build. Sometimes you have to clear away the ruins of your past to lay a new foundation. Sometimes you have to fight for it. If my story has meant anything to you, I hope you'll share a piece of yours in the comments below. Tell me what home means to you. This channel is more than just stories. It's a community of people who understand that our pasts don't have to be our prisons. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Join us, because we all have a story to build. And the work is just beginning.